I was standing on the steps of the New York Stock Exchange, watching my company's stock symbol flash across the digital board for the first time. $4.2 million. That was what my little software company had just sold for. The cameras were rolling, reporters were asking questions, and there in the crowd stood my parents and my cousin Tyler, their faces, a mixture of forced smiles and barely concealed discomfort, because they knew what I knew. They knew they had bet on the wrong horse. But let me take you back to where this all started 3 years ago when my own family crushed my dreams. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. Hit that like button if you are ready for a story about family betrayal and sweet vindication, and do not forget to subscribe because you will not want to miss how this unfolds. I remember that night in October like it was yesterday. I was hunched over my laptop in my cramped Austin apartment, surrounded by empty coffee cups and pizza boxes, working on something that would change everything. At 28, I had been grinding as a senior software engineer at a decent tech company for 5 years, pulling in a comfortable $75,000 a year. But comfort was not what kept me up at night. What kept me awake was the idea that had been burning in my mind for months. The problem was, everywhere I looked, small businesses across America were drowning in inventory chaos. I watched my neighbor, Maria, who owned a small boutique, spending hours every week manually tracking her stock with Excel spreadsheets and handwritten notes. I saw coffee shop owners losing money because they never knew when they were about to run out of their best-selling items. These people needed something simple, affordable, and actually designed for businesses like theirs, not the complicated, expensive systems built for corporations. So I started building it. Every night after my day job, every weekend, every spare moment I could find, I taught myself new programming languages, studied user interface design, and slowly but surely my inventory management software began to take shape. It was clean, intuitive, and most importantly, it worked exactly the way small business owners actually thought about their inventory. After 6 months of relentless development, I had something real. I reached out to 12 local businesses and convinced them to test my software for free. The feedback was incredible. Maria told me it had cut her inventory management time in half. The coffee shop owner said he had not run out of his signature blend in 3 weeks. A small bookstore owner actually called me to say it was the first piece of business software that did not make her want to throw her computer out the window. But turning a prototype into a real business required money. Real money. I calculated that I needed $35,000 to properly launch. That would cover the legal paperwork to incorporate professional design work to make the interface even better, initial marketing to reach customers beyond my neighborhood, and enough runway to work on it full-time for 6 months while building a customer base. I had about $8,000 in savings, which was not even close to enough. That is when I decided to approach my family. The November air was crisp as I drove the 3 hours from Austin to my parents' house in suburban Dallas for Thanksgiving dinner. My dad Robert and my mom Patricia had both worked as accountants their entire careers. They understood numbers, they understood business, and they had always been proud of my success in tech. If anyone would understand the opportunity I was presenting, it would be them. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing as I set up my laptop in the living room after dinner. My parents sat on their familiar beige couch, reading glasses perched on their noses while I walked them through everything. I showed them my market research, proving that small business inventory management was a $12 billion market that was being ignored by the major software companies. I presented my financial projections, conservative estimates, showing how the business could be profitable within 18 months. Most importantly, I demonstrated the actual software, showing them how intuitive and powerful it was compared to the clunky alternatives. My cousin Tyler was there too, sitting in the corner armchair listening intently. At 25, he had just graduated from college with a business degree and was living with his parents while figuring out his next move. He asked a few questions about my target market and pricing strategy, seeming genuinely interested in how I had identified the opportunity. My parents seemed engaged throughout the presentation. They asked smart questions about customer acquisition costs and recurring revenue models. My dad wanted to know about the competitive landscape, and my mom was curious about the legal structure I was planning. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely optimistic. These were people who had supported me my entire life, who had paid for my college education, who had always encouraged me to take calculated risks. As I packed up my laptop that night, my dad patted me on the shoulder and said they would need some time to think it over. That was reasonable. $35,000 was not a small amount of money, and they were naturally cautious people. I told them to take all the time they needed and drove back to Austin, feeling more hopeful than I had in weeks. 2 weeks later, they called and asked me to meet them for coffee at a place near their house. I knew before I even sat down what they were going to say. I could see it in their faces, that carefully practiced expression parents get when they are about to deliver disappointing news they think is for your own good. My dad cleared his throat and began the speech I am sure they had rehearsed. They had thought about it carefully, he said, but they just did not see the market potential I was describing. The competition seemed too established, and the whole thing felt too risky. My mom jumped in to add that they were worried about me leaving my stable job with good benefits for something so uncertain. They had worked their entire careers in corporate environments, and that stability had served them well. They wanted the same security for me. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. These were the people who had always told me I could accomplish anything I set my mind to. But now when I was asking them to believe in me with their wallets instead of just their words, suddenly I was taking too big a risk. They suggested I focus on getting promoted at my current job. Instead, maybe work on the software as a side project until it proved itself. I thanked them for their time and drove home in silence, my dreams feeling heavier than they had ever felt before. 1 month later, I was at my Uncle Mike's house for our monthly family barbecue, trying to act normal, despite still feeling raw from my parents' rejection. I had been working on securing funding from other sources, but it was slow going. Banks wanted more collateral than I had, and the few angel investors I had managed to contact were not interested in such a small deal. That is when Tyler stood up in the middle of the barbecue and announced he had something exciting to share with everyone. He had been working on a business idea, he said, and he wanted to get the family's thoughts. My stomach dropped as he pulled out a tablet and began setting up what was clearly a well-prepared presentation. His idea, he explained with confidence, was a social media management tool specifically designed for restaurants. He talked about how restaurant owners were struggling to maintain their online presence across multiple platforms, how they needed help creating engaging content, and how his software would solve all of those problems in one simple dashboard. He had slides showing market-size competitor analysis and projected revenue streams. I sat there watching him present, and it felt like déjà vu, not because his idea was the same as mine, but because his entire approach was eerily familiar. The way he structured his arguments, the specific market research techniques he had used, even his presentation style, seemed to mirror exactly what I had done at Thanksgiving dinner just 1 month earlier. The main difference was that instead of inventory management for retail businesses, he was targeting social media management for restaurants. But what really got to me was watching my parents' reaction. They were leaning forward, asking engaged questions, nodding appreciatively at his research. My dad wanted to know more about his customer acquisition strategy. My mom was impressed by his competitive analysis. The same parents who had told me just weeks earlier that small business software was too risky were now showing genuine enthusiasm for what was essentially the exact same type of business model, just in a different niche. When Tyler finished his presentation, the family erupted in congratulations. My aunt was talking about how brilliant he was for identifying such a clear market need. My uncle was already bragging about his entrepreneurial son. And my parents were asking the kinds of detailed follow-up questions that suggested they were seriously considering getting involved. I managed to get through the rest of the barbecue by focusing on my burger and avoiding eye contact with anyone. But the whole drive home, I kept thinking about that presentation. Tyler was smart, but he was not experienced in software development. He had never built anything more complex than a college website project. His market research, while impressive, seemed to rely heavily on the same methodology I had used for my own business plan, and his confidence about execution seemed to come from somewhere other than actual hands-on experience building software products. Something about the whole thing just felt off, but I could not put my finger on exactly what. The following week, I got a call from my sister Amy. She had news that she thought I should hear, and she sounded uncomfortable delivering it. My parents, she told me, had decided to invest in Tyler's restaurant social media company. Not only that, but they were investing $40,000, which was more than I had even asked them for. They had been so impressed with his business plan and market opportunity that they had taken out a second mortgage on their house to fund his startup. I had to ask her to repeat it because I was sure I had misunderstood. The same parents who had told me that small business software was too risky were now mortgaging their house to fund my cousin's small business software company. The same people who had worried about me leaving my stable job were encouraging Tyler to become a full-time entrepreneur. I called them that evening, trying to keep my voice level and professional. I asked them directly how Tyler's business model was fundamentally different from what I had presented to them. My dad explained that restaurant social media management had clearer market demand because restaurants were obviously struggling with online marketing. When I pointed out that retail businesses were just as obviously struggling with inventory management, he said Tyler's approach seemed more proven, even though Tyler had never actually built or sold software to anyone. My mom added that Tyler had done such thorough research and seemed so prepared. When I reminded her that I had spent 6 months building actual working software and testing it with real customers, she said that was nice, but Tyler's presentation had just been more convincing. I hung up that night feeling like I was living in an alternate reality. Everything I had been told about why they could not invest in my business was apparently not true when it came to Tyler's business. The risk was not really the issue. The market uncertainty was not really the issue. Something else was going on here, and I was starting to understand that maybe it had nothing to do with business fundamentals and everything to do with family dynamics I had never fully grasped. But I was not going to let that stop me. If my family would not believe in me, I would find other people who would. I started putting everything I had into making my software succeed without them. I used credit cards to cover my basic development costs. I took out a small personal loan to pay for legal incorporation fees. Every evening and weekend became dedicated to improving my product and finding customers who understood its value. Meanwhile, Tyler's company launched with all the fanfare that $40,000 could buy. He rented a small office space in a trendy part of Dallas, hired a graphic designer to create a professional website, and started a marketing campaign targeting local restaurants. At every family gathering, he was the center of attention, updating everyone on his latest partnerships and growth metrics. I started avoiding those gatherings. It was just too painful watching my cousin get celebrated for pursuing the exact same path that my parents had told me was too risky for their son. Every conversation seemed to revolve around Tyler's entrepreneurial journey, while my own business efforts were treated like a cute hobby I was working on in my spare time. But while everyone was paying attention to Tyler's flashy launch, I was quietly building something real. 6 months after Tyler's company launch, the cracks began to show. I heard about it first from Amy, who had been talking to our cousin more frequently than I had. Tyler was running into serious technical problems that he had not anticipated. The software his small development team had built was constantly crashing when restaurants tried to upload photos for their social media posts. Customer service complaints were piling up because the automated posting feature kept duplicating content or posting at completely wrong times. Tyler had learned what I could have told him from the beginning. Building reliable software is incredibly hard, and it takes much longer than optimistic business plans suggest. He had focused so much energy on the business development and marketing side that he had underestimated the technical challenges. Now he was trying to fix fundamental problems with software architecture while also managing angry customers and burning through his investment money faster than he had projected. At a family dinner in late spring, Tyler pulled me aside privately. For the first time since his big announcement, he seemed genuinely humble. He admitted that he was in over his head with the technical aspects of running a software company. He asked if I had any advice about managing development teams or dealing with scalability issues. I tried to be helpful, sharing some of the lessons I had learned, but mostly I felt sad watching him struggle with problems I had spent years learning to anticipate and solve. Meanwhile, my own business was growing steadily. Without the pressure of having to justify a large upfront investment, I had been able to focus on building relationships with customers organically. Word-of-mouth referrals were bringing me new clients every week. The 3 retail chains that had started as beta testers had signed annual contracts and were recommending my software to other businesses in their networks. By summer, I had reached a point where I needed to make a decision. My software was generating $20,000 in monthly recurring revenue, and I had a waiting list of businesses wanting to sign up. I could not continue treating this as a side project. I hired 2 part-time developers to help me improve the product and handle the growing customer support needs. I rented a small office space in a shared workspace building, nothing fancy but professional enough to meet with clients. The local Austin Business Journal noticed what I was doing and wrote a feature article about my company. They positioned it as a classic bootstrap success story, highlighting how I had built a profitable business without outside funding by focusing relentlessly on customer needs rather than flashy marketing. The article brought even more attention, and I started getting inquiries from businesses in other cities who wanted to use my software. At the same family gathering, where Tyler had confided his struggles to me, I mentioned the Business Journal article to my parents. They seemed surprised that my side project had gotten that kind of recognition, but they still treated it as a nice accomplishment rather than a serious business. The contrast with how they talked about Tyler's company was stark. Even though his business was clearly struggling, they still spoke about it with the respect reserved for legitimate entrepreneurial ventures, while mine was still just something I was tinkering with. That dynamic finally shifted in October, almost exactly 1 year after I had first approached my parents for funding. Tyler's social media management company officially shut down. He had burned through most of the $40,000 investment on office rent marketing campaigns that did not generate sustainable customers and repeatedly trying to fix software problems that required more technical expertise his team possessed. The failure hit my parents hard both financially and emotionally. They had not just lost most of their investment, they had also damaged their relationship with Uncle Mike, who blamed them for encouraging Tyler to take risks he was not prepared for. Family dinners became tense, awkward affairs where nobody wanted to talk about business or entrepreneurship. Tyler moved back in with his parents and started looking for regular employment. The whole experience had been humbling for him, and I genuinely felt bad watching him deal with the aftermath. Despite everything, I had never wanted him to fail. I had just wanted my family to recognize that my path was valid too. But the most painful part was watching my parents process what had happened. They were not just disappointed about the money, though losing a significant portion of their retirement savings was obviously stressful. They seemed genuinely confused about how they had misjudged the situation so badly. They had been so confident that Tyler's approach was more sound than mine, and now they were facing the reality that their assessment had been completely wrong. I wish I could say I felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad. This whole situation had created fractures in our family that were going to take a long time to heal, and nobody had really won anything meaningful. 2 years later, my company was valued at $2 million, and I was in serious acquisition talks with a major software corporation that wanted to integrate my inventory management system into their small business suite. The same software that my parents had dismissed as too risky was now being courted by industry leaders who recognized its potential to serve thousands of businesses nationwide. I was in my office on a Tuesday afternoon, reviewing contract terms with my lawyer, when my secretary buzzed to tell me that my parents were in the lobby asking to see me. I had not spoken to them much since Tyler's company had failed. Our interactions had been limited to brief conversations at family holidays, polite but distant. They walked into my office looking older than I remembered and definitely more nervous than I had ever seen them. My dad was carrying a folder of documents, and my mom kept fidgeting with her purse strap. They sat down across from my desk, and for a moment, nobody said anything. Then my dad cleared his throat and began what was clearly a prepared speech. He said they had been thinking a lot about my success and how proud they were of what I had accomplished. They acknowledged that they had made a mistake in not supporting me from the beginning, and they wanted to find a way to be part of my journey going forward. That is when things got weird. My mom opened her purse and pulled out what looked like a legal document. She explained that they had been doing research about family businesses and intellectual property rights. Since I had developed my initial business concept at family gatherings, and since I had discussed my ideas with Tyler, who had contributed insights that influenced my market research approach, they believed there was a legal basis for them to claim partial ownership of my company. I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. My dad jumped in to clarify that they were not trying to be greedy or unfair. They just felt that family members should share in each other's successes, especially when those successes had been built on collaborative family discussions. They had prepared a proposal where they would receive a 15% equity stake in my company in exchange for their emotional support and Tyler's indirect contributions to my business development process. My mom added that they were not asking for this out of greed, but because they needed help recovering from the money they had lost on Tyler's failed business. Their retirement planning had been significantly damaged, and they felt that since they were family, I should want to help them rebuild their financial security. I sat there listening to this presentation, and I felt like I was watching people I did not recognize wearing my parents' faces. These were the same people who had refused to invest $35,000 when I needed it most. Now, they were sitting in my successful company's office, demanding ownership of something they had actively discouraged me from pursuing. I took a deep breath and asked them to walk me through their logic. How exactly had Tyler contributed to my inventory management software when his business had been focused on social media management? How had their emotional support manifested when they had spent 2 years treating my business like a hobby? While celebrating my cousin's identical approach, my dad became defensive, arguing that families should stick together and support each other through difficult times. My mom said I was being ungrateful for all the ways they had helped me throughout my life, from paying for my education to providing guidance when I was starting my career. I acknowledged everything they had done for me growing up, and I told them I was genuinely grateful for their support during my childhood and education. But I also reminded them of their response when I had asked for their help launching this business. I pulled out my phone and read them the notes I had taken after our coffee meeting 2.5 years earlier, where they had told me my idea was too risky and suggested I focus on getting promoted at my corporate job instead. They had no response to that. The room got quiet, and I could see them realizing that their current position was completely inconsistent with their previous actions. But instead of acknowledging the contradiction, they doubled down. My mom said that circumstances had changed, and now that the business was successful, it was different. My dad argued that regardless of their initial response, family members had obligations to help each other. I made them an offer. I would provide them with a loan at favorable interest rates to help them recover from their investment in Tyler's business. I would also set up a monthly payment plan to help supplement their retirement income. But I would not give them equity in a company they had refused to support when it actually needed support. They rejected my offer immediately. They said they deserved ownership, not charity. If I would not agree to their terms, they were prepared to pursue legal action to protect what they saw as their rightful claim to my business. That is when I realized our relationship had changed permanently. These were not the parents who had raised me. These were people who had made bad financial decisions and were now trying to use family guilt to extract money from my success. I told them they were welcome to pursue whatever legal action they felt was appropriate, but that I was confident in my legal position. I had documentation showing that I had developed my software independently, funded it independently, and built the business without any material contribution from them. I also reminded them that Tyler's business had failed specifically because he had not been able to execute on the technical challenges that I had solved through years of experience and careful development. They left my office that day, and we did not speak for several months. The acquisition went through 3 months later. A major software company purchased my business for $4.2 million, recognizing the value of what I had built and the market position I had established. Instead of feeling purely celebratory, though, I found myself thinking about family, about support, and about what we owe the people who raised us, even when they failed to believe in our dreams. I decided to do something that surprised even me. Despite everything that had happened, I set up a retirement trust fund for my parents using a portion of my proceeds from the sale. I did not give them ownership or control, but I ensured they would have financial security for the rest of their lives. I also established a scholarship fund specifically for young entrepreneurs whose families could not or would not support their business ventures, because I understood how lonely and difficult that path could be. Tyler and I eventually reconciled privately. He found success in a different field, working in business development for an established company where he could use his presentation and relationship skills without having to manage technical development. He apologized for the way things had unfolded, and I apologized for any resentment I had carried. Neither of us had chosen our parents' reactions, and we both had learned hard lessons about family dynamics and business. My relationship with my parents evolved into something more distant but functional. They never acknowledged that they had been wrong about my business prospects, but they also never pursued their threatened legal action. We see each other at family holidays, and we are polite, but the easy closeness we used to have is gone. Some bridges once burned cannot be fully rebuilt. I learned that the people who are supposed to support you do not always recognize your potential when you need them most. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give those who doubted you is proving them wrong while still maintaining your integrity and compassion. True success is not just about building wealth or achieving recognition. It is about staying true to your values, even when the people closest to you test your resolve. The real victory was not just selling my company for millions of dollars. It was building something meaningful while maintaining my character, helping others along the way, and learning that my worth as a person was never dependent on my family's approval or investment. Sometimes, the most valuable lessons come from the people who fail to believe in us because they force us to believe in ourselves with a strength we never knew we possessed. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had family members who doubted your dreams or made choices that felt unfair? How did you handle those situations, and what did you learn about yourself in the process? Share your stories in the comments below, because I know many of you have walked similar paths. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it, and make sure to subscribe for more real stories about overcoming family challenges and building success on your own terms. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their dreams are valid, even when their family does not see it yet. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the people who believe in you most are the ones you have not met yet. Keep building, keep believing, and keep proving that your vision matters.